Environmental issues have become a major part of the campaign circuit in the U.S. as this election year gets underway. Climate change, offshore drilling and renewable energy are all coming under the spotlight in early campaigning. You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. So is there a way to improve America's economy without sacrificing environmental concerns? To discuss this, I'm joined by Rick Piltz from Climate Science Watch. He was a member of the federal government climate change science program, but resigned in 2005, becoming a whistleblower when he raised the issue of political interference in the climate change reports. Daniel Weiss is the Director of Climate Change Strategy at the Center for American Progress, and Myron Ebel is the Director at the Center for Energy and Environment at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's look at President Obama's track record on environmental issues and countering climate change. Let's go back to 2008, 2 weeks after he was elected president. This is what he had to say. Let's watch.
Few challenges facing America and the world are more urgent than combating climate change. The science is beyond dispute and the facts are clear. Sea levels are rising. Coastlines are shrinking. We've seen record drought, spreading famine, and storms that are growing stronger with each passing hurricane season.
Rick Piltz, clearly there was the recognition at that time that climate change, environmental concerns were a serious problem and something had to be done about it. How would you assess his performance 3 years later?
Well, I think it's a very mixed record. Before he was inaugurated, Obama referred to climate change as a problem of urgency and national security. But we really haven't seen the U.S. political leadership acting as though they regard this as a problem of urgency. Obama really did not put on a full force effort to move the major climate legislation during the first 2 years that he was in office. He's been limited in what he can bring to the international treaty talks by not having the legislative backing on that. But he has really failed to articulate the problem of connecting what climate scientists are saying with the need for a strong policy. He doesn't, in his last State of the Union address, he didn't even mention climate change. So he's backed away from it. He hasn't really taken ownership of the issue. He hasn't educated or mobilized public opinion. And I think it's letting a very important opportunity go by. It's a failure of leadership in that respect.
There have been some dishonest practices, haven't they? You blew the whistle on the White House, which had been, I guess, censoring or editing climate change information in 2005. In fact, the person who was responsible for that, according to information we have, was a man called Philip Cooney, a gentleman called Philip Cooney, whose previous job was at the American Petroleum Institute, which, as we know, represents the interests of big oil. So,
and he left the White House to go to
ExxonMobil, that's right. Yeah, but so has there been honesty in this debate?
Well, I think in the case of the Bush administration, they came in with a political position. They were not going to regulate the fossil fuel industry. They were not going to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. But they then went so far as to conform the science-related communication to their political position, rather than make policy drawing on the best advice that they were getting from the climate science community. My view is that people who are not climate science experts should pay attention when the National Academy of Sciences and the other leading climate scientific entities and assessments call attention to a problem. In this case, it was ideology trumping science. I wouldn't get drawn off into a science debate with someone who really has no credentials in that area. I think we need to pay attention to the leading experts, and there I think the message is pretty clear and calls for a stronger policy than we have now.
Let's look at the current state of the debate as far as the election is concerned. Now, some of the Republican candidates like Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum and Rick Perry say there's no evidence that humans are responsible for climate change. So let's look at the policy platforms of some of these candidates. Now, the current frontrunner, Mitt Romney, wants to remove existing limits on carbon dioxide emissions. Newt Gingrich and some other candidates want to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency altogether. Ron Paul wants the government to stay out. He says free markets and private property rights are enough to preserve the environment. All the candidates say they will boost domestic oil production by issuing drilling permits quickly. So there's pretty much a consensus as far as the Republican candidates are concerned on where they stand on environmental rules, changes, and climate change as well. Let's listen to one of those candidates, Newt Gingrich, who said this on the campaign trail. Let's watch this.
This is an agency out of touch with reality, which I believe is incorrigible, and you need a new agency that is practical, has common sense, uses economic factors, and in the case of pollution, actually incentivizes change, doesn't just punish it.
So, Rick Piltz, this is a bit radical, isn't it? I mean, is it practical to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency?
No, of course not. They're responsible for the whole structure of environmental protection law that's been built up over the last 40 years. But we do have a problem that one of our major political parties has really become radical right-wing on these issues and on a range of issues. That, to me, sets the bar rather low for Obama looking sort of all right on these issues. But in fact, and Obama has been good on clean energy, putting clean energy money into the stimulus bill, supporting a number of things. But he hasn't really mounted any serious challenge to the fossil fuel industry in terms of coal production, offshore oil drilling, moving to drill for oil in the Arctic Ocean, and so forth. Really, I think we have a situation now where our politics are driven by the limits that are set by concentrated corporate power. We see it in the energy and environmental area and in others, whether it's financial regulation or health policy. And government, either party, including Obama and the Democrats, will only make policy up to what it seems to be acceptable to corporate power and wealth. That sets the constraint. And so, in a way, some of the fundamental issues that needs to be raised don't even come into play too much in the election campaign because the parties aren't that fundamentally different.
And
we have unaccountable corporate wealth and power driving the system.
Sorry, Dan, I'll get to you in a moment. It's also the fact that environmental concerns don't feature very highly when people are asked to prioritize their concerns ahead of the election.
Well, I think people are concerned about their economic situation, and rightly so. I mean, this is a terrible situation. You know, the financial capital kind of ran the system off the rails, and you know, we're still digging out from that, and we still have a corporate-controlled economic system that seems to have a business model that doesn't really involve anything more than extracting all the gains at the top and not caring too much of what happens to working people.
All right.
You know, so that's a problem in terms of how the election campaign gets framed, because neither party fundamentally challenges it.
Take a closer look at the top carbon dioxide emitters around the world. Now, the United States emitted more than 5,000 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2009. Compare that with China, now the world's largest polluter. It emits more than 7,000 million tons of carbon dioxide. And India, the world's third largest polluter, emitted more than 1,500 million tons. Rick Piltz, I mean, if we look at the attempts that have been made to regulate this, you know, we had Kyoto, which we know what happened to Kyoto, then we had Copenhagen, we had the Durban Conference. Nothing much has happened. Is this, well, the Durban Conference, let's say, for instance, does that signal the end of any serious discussion on international legislation to regulate the emission of greenhouse gases?
Well, I don't think that you're going to see any big, grand international agreement to strongly regulate greenhouse gases any time in the near future. But coming out of Durban, there was an agreement to keep talking toward a future agreement. It's a global problem. It's going to need global participation, including from China and India and Brazil, as well as the US and the other industrialized countries to solve. But I think it really sends a bad message to the rest of the world that the US, which has been unwilling to do anything to fundamentally change its own trajectory, to start demanding that, I mean, China has 4 or 5 times as many people as the per capita emissions are way lower. To start demanding that other countries start constraining their development and limiting their emissions before we'll come to the table and talk about anything. It's really presumptuous.
Okay. That's where we have to leave it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, Dan, we've run out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thanks. Thank you.
And that's it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now, but we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. You can send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.